Christian Parenting.
Welcome to the Christian Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Steph Thurling. I'm the Executive Director of Christian Parenting, a mom of 3, and I am so glad that you're here. This is a place where you can bring your real self, no matter what that looks like today, and be given the space, resources, and encouragement you need to set aside perfection and grow into the perfectly imperfect parent God made you to be. If we want our kids to develop a lasting faith, we need to be teaching them about Jesus in the home. Parents are so important in raising kids to know, love, and follow Jesus, but it is really hard to know where to start. There's a lot of amazing content out there, so Christian Parenting did all of the sorting and filtering for you and put together a resource to help you navigate it all. Discipleship Simplified is a digital guide that includes some of the best articles, podcasts, and videos on topics like faith at home, reading the Bible, theology, prayer, church and worship, and character. You'll also find conversation guides and discussion starters, and even scripts to use with your kids. So if you've ever wondered, what do I say when my kid doesn't want to go to church? Discipleship Simplified has a script for that. Or if you want to know how to weave scripture and conversations about faith into your everyday life, Discipleship Simplified has ideas for that too. Since this guide is digital, you can download it straight to your phone or computer and search through resources whenever you need it. I know that this guide will be helpful every time you have a question about discipling your kids. You can go to cpgive.org to download your copy for just $5. That's the best of the best resources from top Christian parenting contributors for just $5. Again, that's cpgive.org. Hey friends, thank you for being with me today. We are continuing our series on discipling kids, and today we are talking about teenagers. What does discipleship look like for these older kids, and then how do we help them develop a faith that lasts? I'm joined by Brad Griffin from the Fuller Youth Institute, and we are talking a lot about their latest project, Faith Beyond Youth Group. Research shows us that a lot of kids lose their faith after they leave the home, and the Fuller Youth Institute is asking why. So Brad and I talk about helping our kids develop the character of Christ and a lasting faith, how authenticity, trust, and identity are so important to the next generation, and how living our authentic faith is one of the best ways to teach our kids about Jesus. Brad encourages us to lean into our community, including our church and our youth leaders. He reminds us that we don't need to do it all and that we can be honest with our kids as we grow in faith together. This is an area I'm really passionate about and get really excited about, so I hope that you love this interview as much as I do. Brad, how are you today?
Hey, Steph, I'm doing well. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I told you as a Fuller graduate, I love the Fuller Youth Institute. And I love all the research you've done. I could geek out and talk about it for a really, really long time. So we're going to talk about that later. But first, I want to talk about you and your family so that people can get to know you a little bit. Can you tell us about who you are, what you do, and your family? And then can you describe your family in one word or phrase?
Absolutely. All right. So my family and I live in Southern California, but my wife and I are transplants from Central Kentucky. So we've been out here about 20 years and have mostly raised our kids here. So we have 3 kids. They are right now ages 21, 18, and 15. So, which is I've had a lot of favorite phases. This is one of my new favorite phases.
Oh, why is that?
We have 2 kids in college right now and 1 in high school. And while it has been really sad on one level and hard to adjust to that second one going to college this year, at the same time, it's been fun to kind of have some new rhythms with our youngest. We have 2 girls and a boy. And so our son is at home. He's a sophomore. And it's been a fun stage of kind of getting to know each other and figuring out our rhythms and, what it means to be this family. And then also when the girls come home, it's just a riot. It's a lot of fun. And I love being in a phase where right now our kids have fun together, because there was a time when we weren't so sure that was going to happen.
Thank you for saying that.
Oh man, yeah. The early years are a lot, and 3 siblings can be a lot. And to describe our family in one phrase, that actually might be the way to describe us, is just we're a lot. We're 5 extroverts. We had an introvert living with us for a few years, for about 4 years, and I found myself like we would apologize to her because we're like, look, our dinner table is just a lot. It's loud here. It's so much all the time.
I love that. At least you embrace it.
We do, we own it. We do own it. And we have capacity to be quiet for sure. So I love our kids. I love, the different phases. Certainly it's been really hard and challenging at times. And the phase we're in now feels a little lighter in some ways that are really refreshing. And, we'll take it for however long this lasts. I think one of the things that I've come to believe about parenting is you never know how long a season is. And, there are gifts and burdens and challenges in each season. And just to, take this season for what it is, and also know that whether it's really, really hard or really amazing, it's probably not going to last very long. And just trying to be present in it. I think that's like 3/4 of the work.
Yeah, that's good. That's really
I'm not sure I answered all your questions. So
tell us what you do for work too.
That, right.
Yeah.
So I work at the Fuller Youth Institute. My role right now is Senior Director of Content and Research. So what we do is equip leaders and parents to help young people be their best. Is really one way to say it. We want to understand what we're a research-based organization here at Fuller. And so we want to understand young people, their lives, their stories, their faith, what it takes to be a young person of faith today, and really how we as adults who care for them can support them. And so I'm looking at that through multiple lenses at once, most days. So as a researcher, as a parent, and then also as a pastor and someone who has served as a youth pastor. I'm in a volunteer pastor capacity now in my church. And so I think about this from a lot of different angles all the time, which is either fun or obnoxious to my kids and friends and spouse, depending on the day. So
I can relate to that for sure. So as a dad and a researcher and a youth ministry worker, all of those hats that you wear, what is the one thing that you want every parent to know?
I want every parent to know you're a good enough parent. I believe in this. It's actually a theory that psychologists, that therapists have, that there's sort of this threshold in parenting of good enough, like present enough, consistent enough, supportive enough, attached enough. And once you sort of hit that, everything above that is like beautiful and cake and extra. And probably, I mean, if you're listening to a parenting podcast, probably you're a good enough parent, right? And like, I think we can lower the pressure on ourselves to be all the perfect things that we hear and see and think that parents should be. And probably you're good enough. And I think that can help us sort of take some deep breaths when we worry about all the ways we're not, meeting the standards that we've set for ourselves. And the other thing about being a good enough parent is, there's always therapy later. We tell our kids like, hey, we'll pay for you to go to therapy. Like, for whatever we did wrong, for whatever we've messed up on, we'll support you to work through it. And we're doing the best we can.
Yeah. Well, I love that too, because I feel like, so if you're good enough at most things, like you're good enough, then there can be some things that you're really good at, but you don't have to be really good at everything. Absolutely. And then some things you're probably not so good at, and it all probably evens out to be good enough, right? Like we can't do it all. I wish we could.
No, that's absolutely right. And to pair with that, some of what our research has underscored through the years here at Fuller Youth Institute is, you really shouldn't try to parent alone. That we need other adults around our kids, and that can both lower the pressure on us, as well as really give our kids what they need, which is lots of different adults who have different strengths and who have different gifts to bring them, and can be part of their lives in ways that we can't, because we can't be everything to our kids. We just can't.
Yeah, that's a great point. Tell us more a little bit about some of the research you've done at the Fuller Youth Institute, because you have done all the research about the sticky faith and faith beyond youth group, which is what we'll talk about. So tell us just a little more about what the types of things you have found.
Yeah, well, as researchers, we're really, really curious about the questions, all kinds of questions surrounding young people. Most of our questions are focused around young people and faith development and what it looks like to be part of a community of faith. We care a lot about families and churches and how we can support young people at faith. So those kind of questions, naturally lead us towards all the anxiety adults have about teenagers and young adults in particular who walk away from faith. And so all the research over the past couple of decades has shown this continual decline in church attendance and in people who identify as Christian. And the younger you look, the higher those percentages go. And so there's been a lot of anxiety about young people walking away from church, walking away from faith, what we can do about that. You mentioned sticky faith. So one of our earlier projects was really around this question of what can we do in our families and in our faith communities to help young people have the kind of faith that sticks with them into adulthood. And that set of questions really propelled a whole other set of questions that we keep asking and we keep exploring. And in many ways, we needed to explore again in a new way, now to know, that it's kind of what led to Faith Beyond Youth Group is this question of, well, what are we doing that really transforms the life of a young person such that what they're doing, so in particular in the youth group context, what do we do there that matters outside, that matters everywhere else all week long? Mm-hmm. And I think we can think about that in the same kind of ways in our families, of course, right? What are we doing together as a family that matters outside, that matters everywhere else our kids go? Because when it comes down to it, we don't just want a faith that we can profess or a set of beliefs that we can assent to or something, or, somehow agree to, but we really want something that changes our lives and that makes a difference, that we sometimes call that transformation, right? Or spiritual formation, discipleship. We kept coming back to this word character, that who we are comes out in the everyday life stuff. And who we actually are is what we're getting at here. We want the kind of faith that changes who we actually are.
Yeah. Okay, I want to talk about that, but I also, before we get into that, I do want to know, since this is a parenting podcast, but we're talking about teenagers, and we know that faith at home is important, but we also know that when you're getting to the tween teenage years, like youth group's important, and friends are important, and all of those fun things are super important and influential. So what is the best way, do you think, for parents in the church to partner together to help disciple kids well?
I love that. Well, first we can think of each other as partners. I think that not enough leaders think that way and not enough parents think that way. Sometimes we as parents look at the church and think, maybe this is convenient or helpful. Sometimes we think about church or youth or children's ministry as another service provider. So, we outsource a lot of things as parents, and a lot of that's good. Like, I can't teach my kid to do a backflip. So, maybe a gymnastics coach can, right? Like there are skills I have and skills I don't. When it comes to faith, I think too often we jump to that same sort of outsourcing model where we think, well, all right, if we're part of a church, then that kids ministry is going to take care of this, or that youth ministry is going to sort of cover all the bases that I don't feel competent to cover. And that competency, that's really important, because I think we often feel incompetent as parents. And, and I want to say, my wife and I both have advanced theological degrees, and we have felt incompetent at multiple points to answer our kids' questions about God, about the Bible. I mean, I have studied the Bible professionally, and I can't answer my kids' questions about the Bible. And I want to say that's like, I think if we can get more comfortable with being uncomfortable about all of that, like faith is weird and a mystery and beautiful. And that's exactly why we need the church. It is why we need kids ministry and youth ministry in our lives. And so I do think if we can, as parents and as leaders, see each other as partners in our kids' formation, it can open up something really beautiful, where we're not competing with each other, where we're not, whether that's for time or attention or, or authority. Actually, it's actually a beautiful thing when our kids see a faith leader as someone in their life with some influence and authority, in particular in those years when we as parents begin to have a little bit less authority, at least from the side of, our kids see us as kind of annoying. And
I don't know what you're talking about.
That's really developmentally appropriate. And we shouldn't be threatened by it, but we are, right? And sometimes in those moments, right, it's actually somebody at church who can be an adult with some voice in our kids' life, somebody they'll actually listen to, and they might be saying the exact same thing that we are saying, So I would say for parents, like get to know those leaders. Support them, pray for them, invite them over for dinner. I think the more that we can lean into that sort of partnership approach, the more fruitful that's going to be for everybody, but especially for our kids.
Right. I mean, because we all are on the same team in the sense that we want our kids to develop a lasting faith. Like those youth workers are not in youth ministry for the money.
Right.
They're in it because they want the glory kids to know Jesus. Yeah.
Yes. And I think it's important for us too to keep in mind. So, some of us have very seasoned youth leaders. Others of us, we have really young youth leaders. I mean, a lot of youth leaders, they trend young. And that can be both encouraging to parents and sometimes can feel a little threatening, or we can feel a little bit like, you don't have quite enough life experience to know what you're talking about yet. And I think if we could sort of get beyond the judgment or like feeling threatened by that, and also realize, hey, this youth leader who might be 22, 23, the youth director at my church is 23. And I've got to realize, hey, he probably doesn't actually know how to relate to parents. Like he probably needs a little bit of help to learn how a parent might be thinking or feeling, or how to relate to parents. And I think we can actually step in and help a little bit there and even help fill them in on, hey, this is what it's like from my seat right now. And here are the things that we're struggling with or uncomfortable with, or just that's hard about being a parent. And I think we can really, really support our youth leaders that way when they're a little younger or when they're not a parent. Without the judgment and critique, but just the, hey, let me walk with you a little bit. Let me tell you how this feels from my side.
Yeah, that's a really good point that I hadn't really thought about. So thank you. Let's talk a little more about Faith Beyond Youth Group. It's your guys' latest project. And when I was looking through it, I saw this quote by Kara Powell that I really caught my eye. It says, if faith is what is believed, then character is faith lived out in real time. You guys talk a lot about character in this book, like you mentioned before. So what do you mean when you're talking about character?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tricky word. It can be kind of loaded. And so I think it's good for us to talk about, because some of us, we hear the word and it sort of conjures up baggage. Sometimes we think about character and how it's been used to get us to conform to a set of standards. It's tied to morality, which is, in equal parts, like encouraging and scary for us sometimes. It feels a little dated, like this was important to our grandparents, but maybe kind of irrelevant now. Or it makes us think, okay, this is about sort of a set of rules that we're supposed to follow. That's not what we mean when we talk about character. So, we really dug into the literature that's out there, the research that's out there, and also just in scripture. And where we landed was, when we talk about character, we're talking about living out Jesus' goodness every day by loving God and our neighbors. So we're centering this in Jesus' goodness and Jesus' own character. And in the everydayness of that, right? It's like a little by little, it's who we are in real time. And then we think that's so tied to what Jesus said was, how Jesus summed up all of God's commands in this great command that we might love God and our neighbors as sort of a first calling, right? A first step of faithfulness. And so when we put all that together, we think about character in real time, how we live out Jesus' goodness today by loving God and our neighbors in the little choices, in the big choices. It's more than just being, good kids, which is sort of, or nice kids, but it's actually forming disciples who have the character of Christ. And that is, that's complicated, right? And it is layered, and it's also beautiful, and sometimes really simple. Sometimes it's as simple as choosing kindness, choosing to withhold judgment, sometimes it's choosing the really hard thing. We love to talk about peer pressure as parents and think about that sort of thing with our kids, but really, it's also for us as parents, and modeling is such a huge part of this. How do our kids see us choose character? How do they see us choose to live out Jesus' goodness by loving God and our neighbors in everyday kinds of ways? And that's really, kind of where it starts and where the heart of it is.
As Christian parents, we all want to help our kids develop their faith, and that includes the teens in our lives too. And I have an amazing resource that can help you help the teens in your life develop their faith. The best-selling Teen Study Bible. Its notes and features are designed to help teens discover the eternal truths of God's Word and apply them to the issues they face every day. And it offers biblical advice about dealing with everyday things like friends, family, and school, to bigger things like problems such as bullying and depression. As teens navigate their hectic and sometimes stressful lives, the Teen Study Bible will help them to deepen and understand their faith while assuring them that God is always with them. The Teen Study Bible is now available in the NIV, KJV, and NKJV translations at amazon.com/teenbibles. Again, that's amazon.com/teenbibles.
Hey guys, it's Cynthia Ganoff here, host of the Mesmerized podcast. Many of you know me from my earlier days. You guys, I wrote a book. It's a whole thing, and it's called Life is Messy, God is Good, and it's available wherever you buy books. I know how sloppy, slippery, and downright hard life can be. I mean, I really, really know. Need I remind you of the time I had to call the fire department to get my husband out of a tree? Or the time I pronounced Nova Scotia as Novia Scotia in front of a group? I know, right? But God's not surprised when we drop the ball, trip up, or have trouble getting our Spanx on in the morning. He can use our ridiculous messes and even the I didn't sign up for this losses to shape us. My book, Life is Messy, God is Good, explores how everything from sitting in carpool to binging on queso to chaperoning the dreaded zoo field trip can draw us closer to God, because He's working through our everyday moments. And so let's stop worrying about who the world says we should be and become who God created us to be. Grab your copy of Life is Messy, God is Good, wherever you buy books.
In this book, you talk about 5 ways to form character in a lasting faith. Modeling is one of them. Mm-hmm. And we talk about modeling a lot on this podcast. Like, it is just from so many guests. People are just saying, we have to model it. Faith starts with us, which is obviously true. So
it sounds like pressure.
Pressure. But it is like, work on your own faith. It's going to go a long way. But tell us, can you just summarize the other 5 things really quickly? Because they're cultivating trust, modeling growth. Tell us about them.
Yeah, that's good. So cultivating trust is the first, and just sort of starting with, if we're really going to talk about character, we've got to start with relationships and start with trust, because trust is no longer a given with young people. We can come back to that if you want to come back to that. But cultivating trust, modeling growth. We have to sort of be, faith starts with who we are and how we're living. And then the third kind of point in that compass, it's a 5-point compass, which I know is not what a compass is, but just work with us, right? It's an imperfect metaphor. So cultivate trust, modeling growth, teaching for transformation. We focus a lot in ministry on teaching, but are we really teaching in ways that leads to transformation, that leads to kind of a holistic and really, to life change? And then practicing together. So putting hands and feet on our faith, helping young people get from their heads into their hands and feet, trying things, trying out, whether that's serving or just living out faith, in everyday life, trying something hard, like forgiving someone. That's really hard. And then the last point is making meaning. So how we help process with young people what they're experiencing and help them make spiritual sense of it, help them integrate it into their life. So those are the 5 points.
Yeah. When you are talking about those, even just, obviously I asked you to summarize it in a minute, and there's a lot there. So thank you for doing that. But when you do talk about it, I'm hearing a lot about authenticity. There's trust, modeling, serving, hands-on service. It's all an authentic faith that kids can see and practice living out. And I feel like that's really important to the next generation in a way that it maybe hasn't been emphasized before. Are you finding that to be true?
I think that's really right. That's a great observation. And I would connect that with, trust. We mentioned, I said a moment ago that trust is no longer a given. And there's a lot of research that shows how much trust has dropped by generation to generation. And, today's kids and teenagers in particular trust others, and they trust institutions, and they trust adults less than ever. And they trust influencers more than institutions. It's kind of a TikTok world of authority right now. And that's where we're living as parents. And so that authenticity in our own lives is a way to keep, building trust with young people. And I know sometimes as parents, we think, well, our kids have to trust us, right? But I think if we take a step back, especially in those teen years, kids see through the veneers. They see through the lines that we give them that are not entirely true. And I think it's good for us to really assess, okay, am I being honest with my kids, in things that they're probably at this point seeing through?
Yeah.
And that is the way we can build or rebuild trust with our teenage kids, is just being frank with them, being straightforward with them, answering their questions, as straightforward as we can, and trusting that they will trust us more the more authentic we are with them, without putting our emotional burdens on them. So, I think the flip side of that is sometimes parents think we need to move into sort of best friend mode in the teenage years and not be the parent, and that's not what we're saying at all. Kids still need us to be the parent. They need us to have a certain level of stability. Again, there's lots of realism here, but to be a place they can come back to consistently, but also that we can be authentic with them. Even so, for example, authentic enough to say, hey, I've had a really rough day. I'm kind of falling apart here. And what I need right now is to go talk to a friend, right? So that we're showing for our kids that we need a certain level of caring for ourselves, caring for our own emotions. We're not putting that on them to carry as a burden, but we're being authentic and not just fake about what we're feeling and what we're wrestling with. That goes a long way with kids.
Yeah.
to both cultivate trust, model growth, right? And all the way around, we're also helping them make meaning. Like if my wife goes for a walk with a friend from church because they just need to process their stuff together and talk about things, like that is, it's doing all of that, right? It's modeling Christian character in a way that I think is really healthy for our kids.
Yeah. Well, and kind of to go back to what you were talking about being good enough at the very beginning too. That's also showing like maybe being authentic is you have this big question and I don't know, but one of these other adults in your life probably does. So maybe you should go to that person instead because that's not my thing, you know?
Absolutely. And as you mentioned that, this is a thread through all of our research over the years, how important doubt and questions are in faith development. And as parents, we can be really afraid when our kids voice questions or voice doubts, or sometimes they throw something out there just to be kind of shocking. Like, I don't believe all this God stuff anymore. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And I think our best response to that as a parent is to hold the space with them, and to say something like, thanks for sharing that. Tell me more, or like, I'm curious about that, or something that helps create a space to say, God's not afraid of that. And I'm not afraid of that, and I hope we can stay in a conversation together that will help you share where you really are. Right. And that questions and doubt and struggle can be part of the faith journey because they kind of have to be for us to get to an authentic place in our faith. And as kids are in the teenage years, it's the perfect time to actually share our own stories of struggling with faith on our own, right? Of saying, yeah, I remember really questioning faith. Or, that happened, whether that was in your teenage years, your young adult years, or whether that was like a year ago, like I've had seasons where I've really struggled. And here's what's helped is sometimes a great follow-up as well. Sometimes I like to say one of the reasons that we keep showing up and worshiping together with other believers is because sometimes we need other people to hold faith for us when we are struggling to hold faith for ourselves. And having other people sing when the words that we can't sing or pray the words that we can't pray, that holds our faith up. It's really what it means to practice faith with other people. It's why I believe so deeply in the importance of being part of a church, being part of a local faith community, because sometimes we need other people to hold faith for us. I think we can be so honest about that with our teenage kids in a way that really can strengthen their faith as they move towards adulthood.
Yeah. I mean, we were made for community, and what a gift to be able to show our kids, like you're saying, that like, I need community too. Like I can't do it all on my own.
Yeah.
Even though I'm your mom. And maybe you think that, but no one wants to have their parents on this pedestal and then have them fall, which happens.
Absolutely. And it's almost worse when we're sort of the super parent and, sort of the super Christian. I mean, and I wrestle with this, right? Like I write books about faith development. I'm an obnoxious parent, to my kids, but I think I can give my kids a gift when I can be honest about things that are hard for me or that I struggle with or that, just all of that can help them see faith as something more real and not just something that's sort of up here that we kind of prop up as this untouchable thing. Faith has got to be really touchable, malleable. We have these beautiful stories. Jacob wrestled with God through the night. Like that is so visceral and weird and mysterious. And so, like if a parent's up all night because they can't sleep because they're worried, like that's sometimes our kids need to know that, that we wrestle with God through the night. Yeah. And we don't come away with an easy answer. And sometimes we come away with a limp. That's a hard truth. That's Bible right there. Like we have these stories to witness to us of God's goodness and faithfulness through really, really hard things and in really mysterious ways. Yeah. We could probably go on for 2 hours about that, but that's
I have a lot of questions to go off of that.
Yeah. Me too.
But I do want to, because you mentioned before a few minutes ago, like your wife going on a walk with a friend to like make meaning out of something, to process something. I feel like purpose and meaning and identity has always been important, but I feel like, again, for this next generation, they're just a different generation than before, because we're just living in a different world. But I feel like that's really important to them too. I'm even seeing like my 11-year-old was like, I just don't know what my purpose is. I'm like, me neither. Like, I'm like, that's okay. You're not really supposed to know yet, but we're going to walk through that, So how can we help our kids make meaning out of their life and solidify their identity in Christ?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm really convicted about what you just said. So a prior project, we have a series of books called 3 Big Questions that change every teenager, that shape your future as a student devotional. But it's based around some research around identity, belonging, and purpose. We think these are the 3 core questions that young people wrestle with. And they are tied together, and you just tied them together as you talked about purpose and identity, right? And I think being present to our kids in the questions is one of the most important things. And one of the most important ways we can help them make meaning. Sometimes if we just practice good conversation skills, that we're present to listen, that we ask, well, what happened? Tell me more about that. If we get curious rather than jumping to fixing or solutions, we're really good at fixing as parents, but especially as they get into those preteen and teen years, they need us to not be the fixers, but to be the listeners. And we can help them make meaning and make meaning of these big questions around identity, belonging, and purpose when we just listen. We ask non-judgmental prompts. I wonder about that. I'm curious about that. I got to tell you, Steph, this is a discipline. Like, I have to, in my own parenting, remind myself to use words like "I wonder" as opposed to telling them what I think. I have opinions. and I have a fix.
Researched opinions.
Oh, my word. And I often have an answer, right?
Yeah.
Like for my teenage daughter last year is going through so much drama senior year. And I'm like, oh yeah, ditch that friend. Like, but that's not maybe the best way to get into that conversation, right? Yeah. To really help them make meaning, to help them explore, to help them make their own realization of, oh yeah, when I hang out with that friend, I don't feel like I belong. I feel like dirt about myself because of how they make me feel. And so actually, I'm going to not spend so much time with them. Like that right there, if we can even just kind of get in the space with them and be a safe place for them to share, which, by the way, it's on their time and on their terms. So that might mean, and this is one of the hard things, staying up late, because sometimes, some kids don't open up till after 10 o'clock at night when we're ready to be in bed and they're ready to be chatty. It's developmentally normal, and it takes some willingness on our part to, kind of flex a little bit and just be available. So just making ourselves available. I mean, I hear from parents who say, sometimes I just hang out, in the kitchen late at night, because I know sometimes my teenager is going to walk in there and want some food or, and sometimes they'll be chatty, and I just want to be there for it. And I think that is the kind of availability, that our kids need from us, to help them in those times when they're ready to make meaning, when they're ready to process.
I do appreciate, though, that you mentioned that it's a discipline, because it is. I mean, I also want to fix. My husband's a huge fixer. And also, I want to go to bed. I want to be done. I want to be done parenting.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to finish up. When my kids get home from school, I'm still working. I want to finish my work day. And then when it's bedtime, I want to be done. And that's when they want to chat. And it is, I have to constantly remind myself. And sometimes I fail. Sometimes I'm like, we're going to talk about this later, because I just can't. I'm done. We're done here. But other times I have to just remind myself, this is the moment that I'm given right now.
Yeah.
And it's a discipline to do. So thank you.
It is. And it's important. I mean, I think part of what you shared too there is And we have to draw boundaries. We have to be human. And that's really okay. Back to the good enough parent. Like, it's also good enough if you're like, hey, look, tonight I'm going to bed at 9 because I'm just done. And I got to get up tomorrow and go to work. Fine. Right. And there'll be another time when you're more available. And that's also good enough.
Yeah. And we want to teach our kids boundaries too, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's the little things over time. It's being present for over and over and over again, even more so than like, I think we want the big moments. And, at the end of the day, it's the little moments that really add up and that show our own character to our kids.
Yeah. That's convicting and good. Okay. To end our time, so if someone's listening and is like, yes, I want to be intentional about developing a character of Christ in my kids and really discipling them and helping them develop a lasting faith, what do you think are like 3 things, like the first 3 things parents could start doing with their kids to help them with this?
Yeah. The first would be live your authentic faith. So whatever that is, be real with that journey and invest, in your own authentic faith journey. Whether that means, all the things that means, like whatever that looks like for you and whatever your next step is, whether that's going for a walk with a friend more often because that's how you process, whether that's, being more faithful in worship, whether, whatever that looks like, just live your authentic faith and be on some kind of journey where your own faith is in process. So that's one. The other would be just practice being curious about your kid. Sometimes we think we know our kids the best, and we generally do. We see a lot more of their lives, than anybody else. And at the same time, especially as they're becoming, as they're emerging into adolescence and they're really becoming new creatures and they're unfamiliar to themselves and they might be unfamiliar to us. And, we can sort of grieve the loss of that snuggly little kid that we loved that suddenly is, pushing us away or awkward or whatever else. Let's be curious about that kid and getting to know them in a new way. So that would be the second. And the third is just don't do it alone. Get people around you, and whether that is your spouse, hopefully is part of that. If you have a spouse, your friends, your faith leaders, back to those youth leaders, get people around you. I think one of the big lies in America that we believe is that we have to do everything on our own, including parenting and including the faith development of our child. And sometimes we talk about, parents are the greatest influence on their kids' faith, and research does back that up. I don't think we need to talk about that in ways that put extra burdens on parents. I think we can talk about that in ways that say, yes, and this is all the more reason that you need a faith community around yourself and around your kids, that you cannot do this alone. Yeah. And I think we can lean into our responsibility by bringing other people around our kids and ourselves, so that we are not trying to do faith all by ourselves. Faith is not rugged individualism. It's not. That was never the intent. I think biblical faith is really, really rooted in what we do with other people.
Yeah.
So I think that was 3 things.
Yeah. It was 3 good things, 3 very good things. Can you, if people want to hear more or want to know about some of your resources, can you just tell us how we can connect with you and the Fuller Youth Institute and some of the resources you have?
Absolutely. Best place to sort of find everything is fulleryouthinstitute.org. And you can find us on social media at Fuller Youth Institute as well. And you can find me at bgriffinfyi on Instagram.
Perfect. I'll put all those things in show notes. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Steph. This was a really fun conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. I love the reminder that we just have to be good enough. We can excel at some things and struggle with others, and that's okay. And just like Brad said, considering you are listening to a parenting podcast, I can assure you are likely hitting that good enough threshold for your kids. I have links to the Fuller Youth Institute and Brad in show notes. You can go follow along there. I also have links to our digital discipleship guide, Discipleship Simplified. So don't miss out on that amazing resource. It's all of the best Christian parenting resources compiled into one really easy to access place. Thank you for being here. May God bless you this week. May you be reminded that God is continually at work in all of our lives. Even in our worry and our wrestling with God, He is working things out for good, just as He promises. Thank you so much for listening to the Christian Parenting Podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you love this podcast, would you please consider leaving a review and sharing it with a friend? This is the best way to reach more people and encourage even more parents. Christian Parenting is a donor-funded ministry, and we rely on friends like you to keep podcasts like this going. So to find out more about Christian parenting and to make a donation, head over to christianparenting.org or at christianparenting_org on Instagram. Thank you again. See you next week.